Good evening to our friends in the East Coast, good afternoon to our friends in the West, and good in-between times to our friends in the in-between spaces. Welcome back, or welcome for the first time to the Social Justice Power Hour, coming to you somewhat live tonight from the Bayard-Rustin Center for Social Justice virtual headquarters. My name is Robert Seda-Schreiber. I am the chief activist here and your host this evening. Amazingly, your host for the past 125 evenings. We have now shared with you 125 hours of the Power Hour, 125 stories shared, 125 truths told, 125 calls to action. And we thought this week we'd take a breath and we'd share with you some meaningful moments, some windows into these experiences, some of small snippets from those episodes, from those inspirational guests who come and share their time, energy, and spirit with us. So please enjoy these moments, and hopefully they'll encourage you to go back and watch some of the shows on our Facebook page. They're all archived, all 125 episodes, so maybe even a call for a binge watch. But we will be back next week. We will be back live in full force as we do every weeknight here at the Power Hour. And here are some of the guests that you can get excited about, including but not limited to in any way, shape, or form. Alicia Day, Newark's own drag queen extraordinaire. Sam Park, wonderful, incredible, openly gay member of the Georgia House of Representatives. Casey Lemon, author of Heavy. Adam Gopnik, author of 1,000 Small Sanities. Philanthropist and author Frederick Joseph of The Black Friend on Being a Better White Person. Thomas Frank of What's the Matter with Kansas and the new book The People Know. Diversity and publishing champion advocate Jen Baker. Lynn Zimmer, the creator of Queer Kid Stuff. And the president of NARAL Pro-Choice America, Elise Hogue. All those folks and many, many more coming at you the next couple of weeks. But now let's celebrate 125 episodes of the Power Hour. Let's share these meaningful moments together. Enjoy these stories that we've had the honor of sharing with you and with each other and with our beloved community. Until next week, everybody, please take care of each other. Take care of your families, chosen or otherwise, and take care of yourselves. Until next week, much love and respect, everybody. Be well.
Well, I'll start with my journey and my story, because I really wouldn't be the person that I am today without that. I was born in Vietnam. I'm a transracial adoptee. I was adopted into a family living in Australia. So I had my formative years living in Australia before I went to Europe and to the US. And, with what I see with the Trump administration, I went through that as a child, and I'm kind of now reliving it again through the coronavirus racism. When I was growing up in Australia, very confused about my sexuality, never seeing an Asian person on TV, let alone ever meeting an LGBTQ person. We had an administration that publicly said that they didn't want to be Asianized, that Asians were invading the country, and that, they had to leave. So I always grew up feeling like I was othered, and my worth wasn't very important in the world. I suffered a lot of daily racism in society, with teachers, in the school system, with kids, and inside as well, being very confused about who I felt inside and my sexuality, but not having any words for it. I remember as a child being really picked on at school, and I think of the bullying that LGBTQ youth go through and how that affects us into our adulthood. I have one poignant moment as a child when I must have been like 7 or 8. The teacher made me stand up in front of everyone and basically said, this is what failure looked like. And at most in life, I would fail. And every kid laughed at me. There must have been about 30 kids in the room. And the teacher just made me stand there. And as I was sitting down thinking I can't cry because everyone is looking at me and laughing at me. The teacher threw a blackboard eraser, and I just remember the wooden bit just hitting there and thinking, I just don't want to feel this humiliated ever again, and I don't want any child to feel like that. And I didn't really have a sense of community as a child. I was definitely, growing up in an all-white background, looking very different, feeling very different inside. Sport became my haven. I did a lot of team sports and a lot of athletics, but I saw very quickly that I was the only Asian kid in sport. And so that bullying and that racism continued through sports. My teammates picked on me, the coaches picked on me. I remember one clear moment that the coach pulled me aside and said, well, Asian kids, Asian people, you're quite slow. You can't really run as fast. I don't think sprinting is exactly for you. I think maybe long distance running. So I felt like I was kind of pushed out of sports that I loved, and I ended up doing long distance running for a period of time. And I kind of proved them right, because I was actually quite good at it. And I went then to bodybuilding really young. I was probably like 7 or so when I first picked up my first dumbbells. And it was really initially to build that strength and that confidence in myself, because I was being bullied so much. And, I felt very low in my self-worth as well. And then I started going to the gym before I was 10, which was obviously very unusual for an Asian kid, and obviously a girl as well. But I went very quickly and understood going from child sports to adult sports, and completely male dominated, very misogynistic, very sexist as well. And I encountered a terrible amount of misogyny and sexism in the gym environment. And my adopted mother would literally just drop me off at the gym and go shopping. It was kind of like babysitting, but I didn't really go anywhere, and I had no money, and the guy who owned the gym just kind of let me through. But the men in the gym were really horrible. That kind of, that what Trump describes as locker room talk. They did it to my face, behind my back, but I really loved the sport. It was something that I could do myself, and that it started to build this confidence in me, because I also started to see my body changing. And when I think of mental health with LGBTQ youth, I think that, it's a human right. Everyone deserves to play sports, because I know how much I thrived through sports. And it really makes me so sad and so angry, when I hear about laws, anti-trans laws that's passed in such as Idaho, where in the entire state, a trans youth can't play sports. It makes me feel so angry inside, because I remember what sports did for me and how I thrived through sports, and how it gives you so many different life skills that you would take through in your day-to-day life. So I started competing in bodybuilding as a teenager, and that was really unusual for a young Asian woman competing in bodybuilding. I was the only bodybuilder on the circuit, but I loved it so much, and I loved the competitive streak of bodybuilding. So I competed in a number of sports, and then from there I qualified as a strength training coach and started training other athletes as well.
So just as a framework, I think in a moment where so many people are talking about defunding the police from an abolitionist perspective, I want to offer sort of a sense of what abolitionism means. I think many people get very nervous about this term. You hear abolitionism, you're going, oh, what are you trying, So Ruth Wilson Gilmore, I encourage you all to just search her name out. In addition to Angela Davis and folk like Marion Kaba, Black woman, who have, and so many others, right, who have been talking about abolitionism as part of a genealogy that comes from folk like freaking Frederick Douglass, right? Like, Ruthie Wilson Gilmore defines abolitionism as not just the removal of the things that do us harm. And by things, I mean structures, institutions, instrumentalities that do us harm. That doesn't necessarily mean us well. But it's about imagining what ought to go in the place of the bad things that do us harm. And I think that is really, really critical. Because in many ways, abolitionism is a politics of what a theorist, Jose Munoz, might have called the not yet here. It's a faith politic. It's a politic that is asking us to tap into what Robin Kelly calls our freedom dream, to stretch our political imaginations and to conceive of better ways of being, better ways that we might organize community outside of the tools that we have overly relied on that have harmed people. What we know is that jails and prisons and law enforcement have disproportionate negative impact on Black and Latinx communities, right? And Indigenous communities. And there has to be a way for us to not rely on the tools that have harmed so many people. And think about ways that we might engage new ones. So let me give an example. I often say, as a young person who grew up in a home where I watched my mother suffer a physical assault by my father, the first line of defense in a moment like that was to call the police, because that's the only option I had within the context of the community I grew up in Camden, within the context of the US. One, we are shaped to think that punishment and retribution are the first and only responses to justice, are the ways that we are to get access to justice. But what I really needed was not necessarily my daddy to be in jail. What I really wanted was the violence. First, I wanted my mother to be safe. So I wanted the violence to be stopped. And I wanted him out of the house so he can so he can sort of come down out of his aggression. I really desired for him to be changed. As a young person, what I desired was not that he would be in a cage, but that somehow if he were away, which meant the cage, that he would be thinking about what he needed to be better, what he needed to stop the violence. Now, imagine if I did not have to call 911, but was presented with, say, a safe number that I could call in my community that may have pulled together, I don't know, faith leaders, maybe somebody who has some expertise in mental health, someone who could be working with a person who had been victimized like my mother, and a person who probably needed therapeutic intervention like my dad, right? What if there was someone who would come and say to my father, we're going to get you out of the house tonight, so that Diane, who was my mother, is no longer feeling unsafe. And we're going to keep you out of the house for as long as it takes. Not in a jail cell, but you're going to be in a place where there's mental health counseling, where you got some accountability partners, where you have maybe an employment coach, etc. All that to say, without us dreaming of other options than the ones that we currently have, which are not the best option for us, we default to what we get, or it was presented to us. So abolitionism is that framework. Now back to Camden. I think Camden, in its efforts to sort of shift its budgetary allotments by moving a lot of the police efforts to, say, state police, the levels of surveillance. So now there are cameras around the city, very panopticon-ish, right? Like, there are other ways that the city sort of pushed its resources, or at least its efforts, in such a way that still over-policing is still done. So I don't know. I think that Camden is a city to look at in terms of what it might look like to play with law enforcement budgets. I'm not sure it's the best example, given that I'm not certain that its starting frame was how can we reimagine community and safety in such a way that doesn't allow us to push forth the militarized police that we overly used. What does a community look like that What I don't know if that was our starting point. So if that's not their starting point, I think that the end is always going to sort of be a sort of representative of what the vision was. And I think that there was more work to do with regards to how to really organize a city's budget, and its sort of cooperative sort of solidarities and people in it, so that the people can really benefit from a reallocation and not just the system itself.
Because it seems like it was so late for you when you were able to come out. And for yourself, how long was that internally happening? And what were some of the touchstones that you were able to have in your life that allowed you to, progress that journey?
Well, it sounds cliche, but I always known that I was transgender even before I knew the word. I remember, gosh, I maybe was 7, maybe going on 8. I was around 2nd, 3rd grade. And my parents are divorced, and I was with my mom at the time and my brother. And one night I was crying, and she walked in the room. What's wrong with you? She hood. My mom kind of hood. And she was like, I was like, nobody loves me because I'm not a girl. I want to be a girl. And it's crazy that people take transgenderism as something sexual. There's something, at the end of the day, there's something down there, something sexual. It has to be something sexual. And I've had a great child life, full of fun memories. Never was molested or guided in a wrong way. I grew up. I had a great childhood, but it was natural for me to feel that I should be a woman. And it's just kind of like really crazy for me to even explain this to you now, because I hear it all the time, from other people. But I am one of those people. I'm one of those people that knew at 7 years old that I should be a girl. And I promise you, on everything I've ever created musically and everything that I will do, I pray to God at 7 years old sometimes and prayed that he would just make me a girl. I envisioned myself getting married as a woman to a man with the white dress. That's what I saw. No one told me to feel that way. I didn't see movies on television that encouraged me to do this. This is natural. So from 7 years old on, I knew. But when my mom couldn't handle me and my brother, mainly because of my brother, but my dad was in our life very much, and all of those thoughts and all of those possibilities of becoming a woman disintegrated. Anything feminine that I displayed, my dad just spanked it, whipped it, and beat it and hit it. I'm full of estrogen right now, so you might get a tear out of me, but yeah. This is something that I've just dealt with my whole freaking life. I've had girlfriends, I've had boyfriends, I've had, experiences in life. I've played the role of being a man because I was in church. Goddamn church, man. It does it to us every time, I'm telling you. But I loved church. I loved the music. That drew me there. Everything church was. My whole life was evolved around church. So once I started getting older and got into the music industry, forget about it, because I was surrounded by girls and rappers. They would bring girls, and the executives will bang girls at my studio. It was just this thing that I had to do, and I just became this person over the years. And I broke a lot of people's hearts. I've had girlfriends, and I broke their hearts because I couldn't be faithful. I was secretly cheating on them with men. And man, what a way to live, being trans, even if you're not identifying as trans openly, you're just transgender and you know it. You know it. Either you deal with it or some people can't handle it and they take their lives, you know? So personally, I've always known, you know, but 2012, it really just started to weigh on me, like your life is passing before you and you're not living your full truth. And I'm thinking, what will I lose? I thought about every possibility, and every possibility was worth losing just to experience who the fuck I am for a year, for 2 years. Just let me introduce myself to myself and let me see how that shit feels. Let me live my truth. Let me see how that feels. Fuck a music, fuck a record, a check. These people are living. I'm not living. I'm just breathing. I'm not alive, you know? So when you know you're transgender, you know it. You know it. There's not even a doubt, you know.
I would have loved to sit with you at one of those library tables because I'm sure there were moments of epiphany for you, and I would have loved to just see your face light up when you like
Well,
made connections.
you know, it's funny. There are definitely moments of epiphany. One that actually really directly relates to this. You know, I knew always that race, racism, and white supremacy were going to have to be a large part of the conversation of my books. That's just the nature of queer history, particularly the period that I was looking at and the place that I was looking at. But one thing that I did not know, I didn't know a ton about the general history of Brooklyn. That was this area that I really needed to learn. And when I started doing the research for when Brooklyn was queer, I noticed that I was finding mostly white people. And now this happens when you're doing basic entry-level research on anything, right? If you don't know how to look and you don't look closely, most of the sources you're going to find, if you're just looking at newspapers or mainstream texts and things like that, they're going to talk about white people. So I knew I was going to have to work around that no matter what. But this was at a level that I was shocked by. Why was it, I kept asking myself, that there seemed to be only white people in some of this history of Brooklyn? And so then I started to look at the actual history of Brooklyn and realized that for much of Brooklyn's history, it was a much more white space and a much more racist space than the rest of New York City. And in many ways, that's kind of hard to quantify. But we know that up until about the 1930s, Brooklyn was, well, from the end of slavery in New York up through the 1930s, Brooklyn was basically never less than 98% white. And at times it was as much as 99.5% white, much whiter than Manhattan. We also know that when there were votes taken around giving the right to vote to all black men, not just black men who owned property in the 1860s, the attempt to pass the bill fails in New York State. It only garners about 36% of the vote, I think. But in Brooklyn, it only gets 20% of the vote, right? Brooklyn was a white, racist, and parochial space in many ways, which also contained many people of color and actually had many people of color passing through it for work, for leisure, for friends, for religious reasons, for gatherings. There's an important black neighborhood in Brooklyn's history named Weeksville that also has queer history to it that's incredibly important, right? Brooklyn has people of color as far back as we can go. In fact, before white people show up. But for a long period, the period in which modern LGBT identities were constructed and defined, the Victorian period up through the early 20th century, Brooklyn was a very white space. And so once I realized that, once I saw the demographics, once I saw the redlining, once I saw all of those elements, I knew that I was going to have to go in even more deeply than I had thought I was going to on white supremacy and racism. And it became a kind of thread that wends its way through the entire book. And this article was a great way for me to kind of pick it out and say, this epiphany was so important to me. I want to make sure that people don't miss it inside all of the other stories, because you can read my book and spend the entire time talking about how great and fun these, drag kings were, or all of the more exciting and upbeat elements, and maybe not get at this part of it.
So, and what I'm talking about specifically is after Baltimore and Ferguson, you implemented a task force report. Can you tell us a little about that?
Well, sure. So first of all, I would say elections have consequences. And we knew that. And part of why we tried to get so much done in 8 years is that you never have any assurance about what happens after you leave. And a lot of the decisions that the Bush administration made, for example, we reversed. And so that's just the way it works. If you're the president, you get to set the tone, you get to set the agenda, and you get to set the policies. And so what grew out of the tragic death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, preceded by generations and generations of Black people being treated unfairly at the hands of those who have sworn to serve and protect them, which is a microcosm of the challenges that we have in society. But the demonstrations that began in Ferguson continued across the country with the deaths of Tamir Rice, Eric Gardner, Laquan McDonald, my hometown, made us say to ourselves in the first instance, what could we be doing to better affect this breach in a relationship between police and communities of color? Now keep in mind that policing is a local effort. It's up to the mayors and the city council to select the police chief, decide the budgets, decide the priorities, decide how they approach the community in terms of their interactions. But the federal government has a really important role to play as well. And so I will give you two examples of work that we did. So after Ferguson, President Obama sent Eric Holder, who was then the Attorney General, to Ferguson to meet with the demonstrators, family, law enforcement, the clergy, advocacy groups, and to sit down and say, how can we begin the healing of this community? And what he heard was that this wasn't an isolated incident, that there were, in fact, many cases of Black people who were stopped by the police, who were given tickets for minor violations, whether it's a parking ticket that hadn't been paid or a headlight that was out, discovered as a result of an investigation done by the Justice Department over a period of time that there was, in fact, a pattern and practice of discriminatory behavior. Now, what our Justice Department did with that was to require the city to enter into a consent decree to say these are the steps we're going to take to improve this situation and stop this discriminatory behavior. So that's, in a sense, the stick that the federal government has to use. They can also bring hate crimes against the individual person if they discover that the reason why the crime was committed was because of the race of the person. After a few months went by and we saw these additional cases, President Obama thought, well, how about if we convene a task force of experts, of police, of advocates, of people who've done research in the area of improving this bond of trust, and bring them together and make some concrete recommendations that we can then give to local law enforcement together with tools. So whether it's training tools, funding body cameras, requiring the non-use of military-style equipment that was so offensive to communities of color. These are the kinds of things that came out of the task force, deciding that there really should be independent investigations when violence involving police occurred, because the prosecutors have to work hand in glove with the police, and so their bond of trust creates an inherent conflict of interest. And before the task force actually began their work, President Obama met with a group of the demonstrators from around the country, including Ferguson. And as a result of that meeting, he asked one of them, Brittany Packnett, who's now a superstar, I see her on TV all the time, to join the task force. She was the second youngest person on the task force. She was reluctant to join the task force because she thought, well, anybody listen to me. She is the one who advocated and persuaded the rest of the committee to include in the recommendations independent investigations. So it was a blueprint, and we spent the next few years really working with local law enforcement around the country, including the law enforcement in Minneapolis, which is so heartbreaking because when we left, that work ended.
I do want to make sure that I want to talk about Sesame Street. I could talk about that for 3, 4, 5 days. But the book also really talks about the other shows at the time too. I mean, this was you really, the word revolution is not hyperbolic. It's absolutely essential. You know, you're talking about Zoom, you're talking about Mr. Rogers, you're talking about Electric Company. You're talking.
Yeah, I mean, the premise of the book, or the overarching premise, is that, well, there've been a couple of really good books about Sesame Street, just Sesame Street, but the premise is to look at these shows of the late 60s and 70s, meaning Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, The Electric Company, Schoolhouse Rock, Free to Be You and Me, and others, Zoom. I had never seen them described as a social movement, which to me they were. Collectively, they weren't just a slate of kids programming that happened to air when I was a kid. The more I look back upon that period, what's unique about it was that was a social movement. Those shows were developed for the betterment of children by activists.
So it's so interesting. I want to talk about the book, but I want to talk about you. And I know that's going to make you uncomfortable. I know you well enough already that's going to make you, but it's really important to me that we talk about our journeys. And that's something that our community really appreciates too. So how did you come to this? You're profiling these incredible folks. You're going out and interviewing and being in people's houses and apartments and hotel rooms and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
When do you have this epiphany? This is something that I want to pursue. Was there something that flipped a button in your head, or was it something that you saw, or was it a more gradual process?
Can I preface my answer with just how I'm feeling today?
Of course.
Okay. I was actually feeling pretty bad today. Like, just the news was affecting me badly. I don't even want to get into the bullet points of it, and bullet points is perhaps too inapt a phrase by itself, but there's been a lot of bad news, and I was looking forward to doing this program tonight because it allows me to talk about the capability of people, and especially particularly Americans, to be their best version of themselves, and for the United States to be the best version of itself. And I came up, now I'm getting back to your question, I came up with the concept for this book about 5 years ago. And 5 years ago might seem like, well, to me, it seems like an eternity ago now. I mean, 5 years ago was a very different world. But even then, when we had different presidents and no pandemic, there seemed something really broken and fragmented about our society. And I wanted to look back at a period that where something seemed to work, where even though it was an experiment that not every aspect of it fulfilled its potential, that period when they generated Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers, all these programs teaching empathy and radical kindness and letters and numbers and trying to lift up the least fortunate among us, I thought that's something I want to get into because I want to, it would be reassuring to me to sort of immerse myself in this. And beyond the nostalgia aspect, it might also provide a kind of roadmap for like how can we recreate those circumstances? What can we learn from those late 60s, early 70s people?
What I'm thrilled about is that you did this book, because I feel like there'd be so many folks, and not disparaging other people, but there'd be so many folks who would think of this as an easy cash grab, as an easy nostalgia trip down memory lane. This is an easy book to sell. This is an easy book to move. But you saw the potential of actually making a difference with it. But now you're working at thebody.com. How did you get there? What is thebody.com for those, few people may not know what that is? And what brought you there? What brought you to that place where you thought you could do the most good?
Sure. Thank you. So yeah, I am a senior editor of thebody.com and also our sort of sister website, The Body Pro. So, and this is The Body's 25th anniversary this year. So it's pretty exciting time for us. Thebody.com is news and information website, primarily focused on people living with HIV and communities most impacted by HIV. But we also do other sorts of news, personal stories, political stories, and information resources that are also centered around kind of LGBT health, reproductive health. We do also a lot of work around, kind of health and issues related to substance use, particularly because of the opioid epidemic and also crystal meth and other things that really impact the kind of intersection of communities living with and impacted by HIV. And our website, The Body Pro, which is the Pro stands for professional. So it's our sister site that's sort of more geared towards people who work in the sort of field of HIV. So there we cover sort of more kind of high level, I say high level, but, you know, some of the more in the weeds research around, you know, treatment, prevention. We cover a lot of the big conferences, big HIV research conferences at The Body Pro. And I should say too that in the kind of wake of the coronavirus, we've been doing a whole lot of both personal stories, research news, and kind of resources about coronavirus. So you'll see lots of that on our site as well. And how I got there is sort of a long story. I'll say that, well, kind of most immediately was prior to working at The Body. I'm now about 2.5 going on 3 years as senior editor of The Body. Before that, though, I was the U.S. and Global Health Policy Director for Treatment Action Group. And people may know Treatment Action Group, or TAG, if you're familiar with ACT UP and the history of ACT UP New York. And TAG was originally the Treatment and Data Committee of ACT UP that then split off in 1992, 1993, and became its own organization, really focused on, you know, kind of doing the kind of activism and advocacy around treatment access for HIV, tuberculosis, and hepatitis, both US and worldwide. So it's kind of directly how I ended up at The Body. I would say kind of a longer story in terms of my journey into social justice work. In some ways, I often tell people that I got it honest. So I come from, you know, a family, my mom's side of the family, where, you know, people have just histories of activism. Their long line of AME, which is African Methodist Episcopal Church, members and reverends, frankly, on my mom's side of the family, going back into slavery, frankly. My mom's family's from Tennessee and Kentucky, West Virginia. And, you know, several of my family members were involved in different kinds of civil rights, desegregation work. One of my great aunt was a registered nurse married to my great uncle, who was an AME minister. And when they had a church in the Bay Area in the 1960s, my aunt helped the Black Panthers kind of set up their clinics in the late 60s, early 70s. And then my mom, we grew up, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, grew up primarily in a housing project on the east side of Cleveland. But my mom was, you know, also an activist, had been a rank and file member of the Cleveland Black Panther Party when she was very young, when she was a teenager. And then later did some activism around, you know, kind of housing conditions in the project I lived in. She also was a big kind of anti-Chief Wahoo symbol, if you know that sort of work in the Cleveland Indians. So I kind of had it, you know, in my family, and both sides of my family, you know, people just really love to talk and debate politics. I sort of grew up with that. Now, I thought I was going to be a performing artist. I went to undergrad for theater, studied theater, graduated from Ohio Wesleyan University in 1997, moved back to Cleveland initially, and taught Shakespeare in high schools and did shows, productions at night, moved to New York in 1999, was doing theater in New York and working. And then over time, it just became less, you know, doing another sort of Shakespeare production became less prescient to me, as, you know, I moved to New York about a month before Amadou Diallo was killed in the South Bronx, and about a year and a half before 9/11 happened, or 2 years before 9/11 happened, actually. So, you know, once those things started to happen, I started to sort of shift my attention and focus to doing social justice work and organizing work around kind of criminalization issues, police brutality, criminalization of queer youth in New York City, and kind of got into HIV work through that, work as well. And, have worked with a number of organizations from Fierce to Critical Resistance to was the executive director of Queers for Economic Justice. And, and as I mentioned before, Treatment Action Group, and now, working as the editor of The Body. So that's kind of where I've come from.
Yeah, I mean, I do a podcast called Bad with Money. That's one of the shows that I do. And it's a show about finances. And it started in 2016, kind of me being like, what is money? How do you get it? How do you fix your debt? What even are stocks? What is this? And then as I've learned more and more, like slowly, the election happened in the midst of season 1. And there's a very cursed episode where I'm like, this episode comes out tomorrow, and by then Hillary Clinton will be president. So like, see you guys, I can't even listen to that one. It's so cursed. But like, so I had this idea for the show. And then like over time, the more I learned about the system and the more I learned about the ways in which money worked and banks and the way that the government handles debt and the way that the medical system handles debt, and like the more information I got that I thought would just be like helping me personally, the more I got like radicalized. So really the show has kind of just is like a dumb white girl starts asking questions about money, and then 4 years later is like, I think we have to burn down every institution. And so the show like kind of became this very like socialist leftist radicalization for me. And then it's on season 6, and this season we were going to talk about the like wellness industrial complex and the ways in which it culturally appropriates a lot from like pagan cultures and Native American cultures and sells that to white people, and then also the ways in which it like scams people, and the whole like thing of like how to be perfect, how to buy perfect skin, how to buy perfect health, how do you like become, make your mind perfect with special drinks and vitamins and whatever. And then like, as we were gearing up to do that season and we had done some episodes, or we had banked some episodes, COVID hit. And there's like a lot of episodes, like raw audio of me on my phone in between interviews, just being like, guys, it says that this virus is really serious. Like very like strange horror movie, beginning of horror movie type audio. And then like, so then we switched gears and we started doing episodes just about like scams during COVID, or like, what does this mean for medical bills, or like, what is it going to cost to get a vaccine, that kind of stuff. And then after we had switched gears to talk more about like the pandemic and unemployment and what's going on with like being able to get relief and that kind of stuff, in the midst of those episodes, then the Black Lives Matter protests started, and the death of George Floyd happened, and everything came to this like big, way overdue social justice head for the Black Lives Matter movement. And then that shifted everything. And then we started covering, defunding the police department. And that we just did an episode that came out yesterday about reparations and how reparations would work and why they should be given to the ancestors of formerly enslaved people, and how much money they would each get. And, and I had really only heard of reparations in terms of like jokes on the Chappelle Show, or like something that white people were really upset about. And so then I talked to this guy, Professor William Darity, who is an economist who's like, I had talked to him for the Bad with Money book about income inequality and the racial wealth gap. And finally, we were able to have him on the podcast to talk about reparations, because that's one of his areas of expertise. And my audience, my fan base is like millennial, Gen Z, like young people. And so to be able to have people on who are like teaching these subjects that maybe would be like boring, but to be able to like have these people on and like accumulate this information that people are looking for right now, especially young people, through the lens of like, I'm a little bit funny about it, but I'm also like asking very obvious questions because I don't know. So like, you know, we have an episode coming out soon that's about why can't we just cancel student loan debt? And it's just me being like, why can't we just cancel it? And then, you know, I think it makes people have to go in circles to be like, well, we can't, and I'm like, but why? And so I think it's like we've shifted now, like the entire like premise of season 6, just based on to match what's been going on in the world. And we tried to be like, we're going to finish the whole season. We're going to bank every episode and then we're going to put them out and it's going to be so relaxing. And instead now we're recording and editing every week the week before so that it's up to date with the news cycle, which we were trying to avoid.
Hello there, my name's Harmonica Sunbeam, and when I'm not doing Drag Queen Story Hour or hosting Drag Bingo on Zoom, I am tuned into the fabulously empowering Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice Power Hour, coming to you every weeknight at 7 p.m. live from their Facebook page. Check it out and tune in. There's something for everyone. See you there.
The one thing that has really, I think, blown my mind away in terms of some of the groups that I follow, some of the organizations I follow, what you guys are doing, to really lean in and to be able to lean in to so much of what we're all doing. There are individuals out there, there are ways to do that. Again, safely, certainly do that safely. If somebody is not in a safe situation, that's a different conversation. But there are resources out there. Just today, a friend of mine posted an organization that was offering free video chats with elderly and then another earlier last week I saw a different one through a sports organization that I'm involved in Philadelphia about offering mentorship via 15-minute video chats with youth right now. So to lean into that in the way that is safest for you, but also to recognize and this is something that my group of friends and I have been reminding each other of. You know, it's right now in some ways it's okay to not be okay as long as you are doing that safely. And when you need to sort of do that wake up of this isn't, you know, we also have to remember so much of this is temporary, though it feels super isolating and feels super present. It is hopefully temporary. And so that hope is certainly what gets us all through it, but to know none of us are absolutely alone.
Yeah, everything Joe said, retweet. But along with that too is also, I mean, even just as simple as, you know, the Bayard Rustin Center is there for you. We are here for you. You want to reach out to us? We're on social media. We're here. We're here to listen because we know, like we said before, our paths to where we got right now were relatively easy compared to a lot of our other people that live in this state, that listen to our stations, that work for our company, you name it. We're here. You want to go, go on Twitter. There's gay Twitter. You know, if you want to find an identity and you want to, find people that maybe are a little bit more like-minded with you, I'm fairly certain that you will be able to find that if you seek it out. As far as being cooped up with people who may not be as accepting as maybe we are, just remember that this situation that we're in right now, all of us worldwide, is temporary. This is not going to be forever. And that once, everything kind of slowly goes back to normal, all of those ways of life and those outlets that you had are going to come back. It's going to get immensely frustrating in the next couple of weeks when you're out of wine and you don't really know what to say to your roommate or your mom or your dad, and you're just like, what is there to do? I've watched all of Netflix and it's going to get better. As far as people that are, in this situation right now, they're struggling with accepting who they are and coming out to others. Well, maybe, normally I would say do it when you're ready. I would say maybe this isn't the best time if you don't feel 100% sure, maybe not the best time. But the other thing that I always say to people that ask me, like, when's the right time? How do I go about this? First thing I always tell them, before you come out to anyone, come out to yourself first. Look at yourself in the mirror and say, self, I'm gay. If you can do that, and you can accept that for yourself, then everything else will fall into place. But again, you control the tide. You control how that rolls out, and then when it's over with, you are going to feel a lot better.
Out at 14. And I will also say, like, nationally, 12 is now the average coming out age. It's been dropping. And I mean, it was actually 12 a few years ago, so it might be lower. But I was 14. And, you mentioned already that you can't be what you don't see. And without that representation, I didn't know that queerness, I mean, I wasn't so sheltered, but I guess it just wasn't on my radar. I just was like, well, I'll grow up and get married. And at that time, that meant you had to marry a man if you were a woman. And I figured I wanted to get married and have kids. So I figured that, I mean, it was just normal. And it was when a friend came out to me as bi, and I was like, liking girls is an option? Oh my gosh, what? And it's really that it's not that I hadn't heard of it. It just didn't, I was like, here in my town, like, this is someone I know, like, this is a real thing that exists. And so I kind of ruminated on it for a while, and just a few months, wondering, am I really not going to get married and have kids? I started, like, trying to dress a little more butch because I thought that was the only way to, like, signal that you were a lesbian. And then I kind of found my more femme identity. I have short hair now, but I usually don't. And yeah, so I came out first. I mean, I started dating that friend who had come out to me because she was the only other queer person I knew. And then I came out to my parents. They were accepting. My whole family was accepting, including my Catholic Republican grandmother, who told me, I came out to her. She was sitting there with white hair, tiny lady. She was like, you can't, I wasn't supposed to fall in love with a poor farmer. You can't help who you love. And because she was with my grandfather for 50 years. And she never planned on becoming a farmer's wife. But you can't help who you love. And so that meant a lot to me. And I have a very religious family in Israel as well. Just everyone accepted me. And I started teaching myself queer history throughout high school, and by National Coming Out Day, which is October 11th of my senior year of high school, I came out to the whole school at morning meeting at the microphone. And funnily enough, we were a mixed middle school, high school for morning meetings. And so some parents of middle schoolers wondered why their daughters, it was an all-girls school, were coming home saying, what's a lesbian? Because some girl just used that word at morning meeting at school. And I got called in to the head of school's office to be told that it was inappropriate. There were no consequences, but I think she just kind of had to be able to tell the parents that she had talked to me. Sadly, when I returned to my high school, I've spoken there 3 times now as an alum, and I've been welcomed, but the head of the middle school, when I came to speak a year or 2 ago, didn't allow the middle schoolers to come to the GSA's morning meeting, or it was a all-school assembly. They had like almost an hour to present on LGBTQ topics, completely rated G, just like we were talking about, of like, you know, this isn't really about graphic sex. It's about identity and community and history. And so I presented to, I was only able to speak to the high school. You know, we just found out that the middle school wasn't going to be there like right before it happened. And I spoke with them, I spoke with the head of school, and I was brought back for a middle school only assembly to be able to speak directly to them. And the GSA was able to come to that. And so, you know, one school at a time.
Be an introspection. I think it's good for us to read about that history and to study that history, because I think there are a lot of lessons in that and things for me, you know, frankly, you know, I think about what they went through and can't even imagine, you know, just what it must have been like to be transgender or gay or bisexual in the 1950s and 60s. And yet these folks led a movement where, you know, last year we were all, for those of us who were fortunate enough to go to New York City and celebrate in the streets. And I personally got exceedingly emotional when we walked by the Stonewall Inn itself, that President Obama made the park there a national monument, the first LGBTQ national monument. But to me, it really hit me because it was like, my goodness, it's been 50 years since that night. And, you know, so many of those folks, you know, unfortunately passed natural. And then, of course, you know, terribly many we lost to AIDS in the 80s. And just to think, like, if they could see us now, and I personally, in my belief, think they are seeing us and we are a reflection of them and that joy. And I'm so proud of that. And it also inspires me for what's to come. You know, I'm really moved by the young people that are out there. And I really should shout out an organization that I am fortunate enough to work with. I'm on the board of Smile in DC, where we work with LGBTQ young folks. And those folks are leaders in their communities and are change makers for the next generations to come. And I'm so excited to see them blossoming into leaders. Frankly, it reminds me a little bit of myself 20 years ago, and to think about, oh my gosh, like, this is what happened in the 20 years that I've been involved in the movement. What's gonna come? And I think we need to keep that hope. As you know, Harvey Milk famously said, but many other people have, you know, we should be thinking about the possibilities of what's to come, despite what's right now a really sticky time. And we can't not gloss that over. And I like to, you know, reflect a lot on people like Audre Lorde and others who have, you know, also provided us with the principles of what we need to do as a people to survive. And I really personally think we need to start thinking of ourselves a little bit more as a people, or, you know, from my Jewish background, and I'm going to throw a little Yiddish out there, you know, like, we need to think of ourselves as a mishpucha. We need to think of ourselves as a family. And I know that's complicated, and sometimes there's like some history there, but right now we need to be there for each other, because so many of us are in vulnerable situations. And to honestly talk about, like, again, the work that we're doing with the redistricting, you know, there's a reason we call it all on the line, is because everything to us is on these, you know, metaphorical but also physical lines that are being drawn and that are at risk of being manipulated, because that will determine essentially what happens on so many issues, from reproductive rights, gun, you know, whether we have gun safety laws, whether we have healthcare, et cetera, all these issues, which of course impact the LGBTQ community, if not even more so. And so that's why I'd really encourage people, please check out our website. It's www.allintheline.org, and you can sign up. And we have, like I said, statewide programs in 9 states, not all the states, but we are sort of all over the country, but we have state directors in 9 of those states right now. And so if you're in a place like Ohio or Florida or Texas, please reach out to us. We can connect you with your state director. We're looking for ways, especially in this moment right now where we're all home, around giving folks opportunities to get trained, to organize, to really drive this conversation. And since I know this is primarily an LGBTQ audience, I really think it's important that we have LGBTQ people at the forefront of this work. I gotta say, like, for example, I went to a training out in Wisconsin last fall, and it just so happened that I recognized a community member that was there from the trans community. But she was there completely not to do trans stuff. Of course, this was about redistricting, and it was so great to have her part of that conversation, to bring her experience as a trans person living in Wisconsin, but also as just a Wisconsinite, right? And I think that's part of what we need to start thinking about in the bigger lens of, like, yes, we are LGBTQ, yes, we are here, but also we are residents of our states, those of us who are citizens of this country, but even if not, whatever status we might be, we have a fundamental right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness in this country. And I say that not whimsically, because right now so much of that, again, is on the line. And so we really need to make sure that we as a community are fully getting involved in work like this.
Absolutely. I am unabashedly and unashamed to stand up in any room and make the make the declaration that I am a Black woman, and I am not afraid to stand up in any room with anybody and say Black, 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 Black. I've been like that my entire life. When I came to the New Jersey General Assembly, Senator Ron Rice, who's been in the Senate for probably over 30 years, he is the chair of the New Jersey Legislative Black Caucus. And when I was a freshman, along with other freshmen in the legislature, I remembered at one meeting he said, "Don't be ashamed to stand up on that chamber floor and say Black, Black, Black." I've done that during the 16 years that I was in the General Assembly. And, it's an uncomfortable conversation for some people, but life isn't about being comfortable, and making social progress and achieving social justice isn't always comfortable. But I never had a problem doing that. I never, ever did. And, I have often, in certain environments I've been in, I've been viewed as an outlier. I've been viewed as, a person that's not going to go along with the program. But being an outlier, being a person not going along with the program, there is one thing that I have. I've got my knowledge. I've got my expertise. I do my homework. I dot my I's. I cross my T's. And those that I have had to work with through the years that possess a different ideology than mine, I really, really believe they just came to the conclusion, listen, she's not going away anywhere. She's a thorn in our side, so we might as well just deal with her and work with her. I think that is what my story is.
And it's a beautiful story, and it's so empowering